Hello guys, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Anonymous, and in this channel we talk about gang stalking, we talk about psychology, I help you devise your own methods on how to beat gang stalkers at their game. And also we cover topics of psychology, and we contextualize everything within the scope of gang stalking. We want to learn as much from the mind as possible. And today we're on chapter 3 of the book Battle for the Mind, the Mechanics of Indoctrination and Brainwashing. So today, chapter 3 is titled The Use of Drugs in Psychotherapy. During this read, you're going to see that we're going to go to the dictionary or to the thesaurus to understand more of it. So you're going to understand that book with me, and I am not going to go over any sentence that I don't understand what it means. Unless I've tried it like 3 or 4 times and I still don't get it, then I'm going to ask you guys for help. If you do know what the book is saying, then just please write it in the comments. Because my English is my second language. I went to college and I was an English major. However, this is actually tough. This is really tough to read sometimes. Also because the only background in psychology that I had was Psychology 101. And that's it. So, let's start. The use of drugs in psychotherapy. In the summer of 1940, we were already prescribing barbiturates. So, here we go. What's a barbiturate? Barbiturate. Let's see. Define barbiturate. So barbiturate, how do you pronounce it?
Barbiturate.
Yeah, barbiturate. It is any class of sedative and sleep-inducing drugs derived from barbituric acid. From barbituric acid. Okay, so barbiturate. So it's like a downer. Both in strong doses orally administered as sedatives for overwrought Dunkirk survivors, and in small intravenous doses to produce semi-drunken state, which helped them to release some of their inhibited emotions of terror, anger, frustration, and despair. Okay? The value of the treatment, which had been in limited use before the war, was confirmed during the subsequent London Blitz. It has since come to be called drug abreaction. The term abreaction, dating from the time of Breuer and Freud, like a psychologist, Freud's early studies in the treatment of hysteria, when they observed that some patients were helped by just talking it out. Freud had, how do you pronounce his name? I've heard it before. I don't think it's fraud. Sigmund Freud. Freud. Sigmund Freud. Sorry. I'm a fraud. Okay, so let's say Freud. In Freud's early studies in the treatment of hysteria, when they observed that patients, Freud had found that affectless memories without any release of emotion were almost useless, meaning that unless a doctor could get his patients to relieve the emotions originally associated with a repressed experience that had caused a neurosis. The mere fact of his remembering the experience would not constitute a cure. Sadler consequently defined abreaction as a process of reviving the memory of a repressed unpleasant experience and expressing in speech and action the emotions related to it, thereby relieving the personality of its influence. In World War I, much the same abreacative oh, I lost the page. Abreacative. Oh, this is fucking awful. Sorry. Hey, compare drugs. Come on. Here we go. Okay, let me bookmark that. There we go. Abreacative. In World War I, much the same abreacative treatment had been successfully used, but for the most part with hypnotism. It's not drugs. And it was then established that the experience responsible for a neurosis might also be one which the patient remembered intellectually, but the emotional associations of which he had repressed. So, I'm going to read this again because it doesn't make a lot of sense yet. In World War I, much the same abreacative treatment had been successfully used, but for the most part with hypnotism, not drugs. And it was then established that the experience responsible for a neurosis might also be one which the patient remembered intellectually, but the emotional associations which he had repressed. Freud came to accept this finding as it became more and more obvious that neurotic symptoms could be caused by even well-remembered incidents in a patient's past. Okay? Both World War's abreaction, whether under drugs or hypnosis, had a definite place in the treatment of acute combat neurosis. Miles Kolpin wrote, Once the man's conscious resistance to discussing his war experiences was overcome, great mental relief followed the pouring out of emotionally charged incidents. It was as if the emotion pent up by this conscious resistance had, by its tension, given rise to the symptoms. The memory, usually of a nature unsuspected by me, then came to the surface. Its return being preceded perhaps by congestion of the face, pressing of the hands to the face, tremblings, and other bodily signs of emotion. In 1920, William Brown had suggested that emotional abreaction was often a far more difficult means of curing a war neurotic than a simple suggestion under hypnosis. Suggestion removes the symptoms, but abreaction removes the cause of the symptoms by producing fully adequate reassociation. It is hoped to show, however, that suggestion may have an important part to play in affecting cures by abreaction. In effect. Published reports on the value of drug abreaction in the handling of Dunkirk and Blitz neurosis casualties caused this treatment to become widely adopted in Great Britain. Further interest was then aroused among American psychiatrists by Grinken and Spiegel later used in 1942 of the same treatment in North Africa, though they renamed it, somewhat confusingly, narcosynthesis. Moreover, Harold Palmer, a British psychiatrist, had been getting interesting results in the same theater of war by the use of ether instead of barbiturates. What's ether? It has to be a drug because of the context. Psychiatry, ether, drugs. Ethyl either is a controlled substance that can be inhaled by users to induce euphoria, disassociation, and sedation. Oh shit. However, overdose of ethyl can ether can lead to respiratory paralysis and death. Other symptoms include dizziness, vomiting, and respiratory damage. Alright, so now we know what ether is. So, instead of barbiturates, improving on a technique for the treatment of hysterical symptoms first described by Penhallow at Boston in 1915 and used by Hearst and his collaborators during the First World War. So Harold Palmer was getting interesting results by using ether instead of barbiturates and improved the treatment for hysterical symptoms described by Penhallow, Boston in 1915. And then it also was used at Boston during the First World War. Now, okay, next paragraph. When in 1944 we also began using ether is it ether or ether? I think it's ether. Pronounce ether. Drugs. Oh. Ether. Okay, so it's ether. In 1944, we also began using ether to induce abreaction, as recommended by Palmer instead of barbiturates. Okay? So we immediately noticed a great difference in our patients' behavior. In most cases, ether released a far greater degree of explosive excitement, which made their recital of events extremely poignant or dramatic. Another most striking observation was that sudden states of collapse after emotional outbursts induced by ether were far more frequent than after those induced by hypnosis or barbiturates. Okay? It then occurred to my colleague, Dr. H.J. Shorvan, and to myself that this collapse phenomenon, which we were now repeatedly observing, might correspond to Pavlov's transmarginal inhibition, which occurs when the cortex has become momentarily incapable of further activity. Okay. We remembered how in some of Pavlov's dogs, the Leningrad flood had accidentally abolished the recently conditioned behavior patterns implanted by him. Was the same thing happening in some of our patients who had suddenly collapsed in this way? If so, we might also expect others to become more suggestible or show reversal of previous patterns of behavior and thought, because a paradoxical or autoparadoxical phase of brain activity was being produced. These proved to be so in some cases at least. Under ether, certain patients could easily be persuaded to relieve experiences of terror, anger, and other excitement. Some of them might then collapse from emotional exhaustion. And lie motionless for a minute or so, unmoved by ordinary stimuli and on coming ground, would often burst into a flood of tears and report that their outstanding symptoms have suddenly disappeared. Or they would describe their minds as now freed of the terror aroused by certain obsessive pictures. Why does this feel so familiar? I swear to God, this is exactly how it felt during gang stalking. Like when I figured out that I wasn't connected to everyone, all the intrusive thoughts disappeared. Like there were a lot of ugly thoughts that were so unpleasant, but they just keep popping up like on my head incessantly. And I would feel this shame because I would feel that everyone was able to see what I was thinking. And then when my mind just simply out of the blue, it just told me the sensations are meaningless. And then I don't remember, and then I figured out that I wasn't connected to everyone because I began experimenting. I stopped turning around when I had an intrusive thought. That was one of the toughest things, is to not look, is to just ignore everyone when I was having an intrusive thought. And then they would question it. What happened? That wasn't it? Did we fuck up? Like, I would hear them talking about this. And that's when I was like, gotcha. And until I just, one day just ignored it because I was like, okay, that's all I needed. And that was the evidence that they were connected to me, that they were feeding off my my reaction to my own thoughts. So that's what happened. Is I had a thought, I had a reaction, and then I would look around to see if they would if they would have any reaction. But when I didn't, I was like, I got you. That's the trick that you're doing. And then I just began doing that. And then I slowly came out of the illusion that they could read my thoughts. And as soon as and then I went to work. And when my mind just like connected all the dots together, how they're supposed to go, how they were tricking me. And when that happened, I just got to work and I just pretended like I was never gang stalked. I never mentioned anything. I didn't say anything. Nothing. Zero. Absolutely no reaction at all. And they're just wondering. But that's good because I'm not giving them any closure. Anything. I'm not giving them anything. I'm just disappearing. That part of me just like poof, just disappeared. The thing that they worked so hard to build in my mind, I just destroyed it. The house of cards fell apart. And then when that happened, I stopped having the intrusive thoughts that were so unpleasant. They just stopped. Or they would describe their minds as now freed of the terror aroused by certain obsessive pictures. They could still think of these if they wished, but without the former hysterical anxiety. Yeah. When simple excitement at the recital of past experiences did not reach the phase of transmarginal inhibition and collapse, little or no change or mental improvement might be observed in the patient. If, however, the abreacative treatment was repeated and drugs were used to increase the amount of emotional stimulation until collapse supervened, sudden improvement could occur. Such a drastic technique was not always necessary. Some patients, for instance, suffering from a recent loss of memory, required only a small dose of barbiturate injected intravenously to relax their brains, and this would send the memory flooding back without further effort. Ether proved most useful in cases where this treatment was not enough. For instance, where abnormal behavior had become so organized and fixed as to resemble the stereotypy described by Pavlov in his dogs. Such conditions could become persistent, disabling and resistant to simpler curative measures, but the massive excitement aroused under ether, ending in a state of transmarginal inhibition and collapse, could disrupt the whole vicious self-sustaining pattern of behavior and induce a rapid return to more normal mental health. Reports originally published in 1945 on 2 cases of this sort will serve as an illustration. A soldier in his 20s had been admitted to 8 posts on the Normandy beachhead, weeping, speechless, and paralyzed. He had had 4 years army service as a truck driver before this and never reported sick with nerves until he had been suddenly converted into an infantryman and sent up to the front line, where mortar fire and shielding produced a rapid breakdown, proving unresponsive to a fortnight sedation treatment in France. He was evacuated to England on admission to our war emergency hospital, still appeared to be mentally slow, tense, and apprehensive. More sedatives were given, followed a week later by insulin treatment designed to increase his weight. Yet, his medical condition did not change. He walked slowly with bent back and rigid features, and his apprehensiveness and slowness of thinking made it difficult for us to get his story out of him. At this stage, an intravenous barbiturate was administered, and he was asked to describe what happened. The drug made him much more relaxed mentally, and he described being under mortar fire for 8 days in the same section of the front line. Fuck. Then he had been taken across a river onto a wood in order to the attack. In the wood, he had become increasingly nervous and begun to tremble and shake. Several men were killed by mortar fire near him, whereupon he lost his voice, burst into tears, and became partially paralyzed. Eventually, 2 wounded men helped him back to an ambulance. I felt sort of stunned. I lay down crying. I could not speak. I could cry and make sounds, but the barbiturates induced very little emotion as he gave his recital, and no change was observed in his condition either immediately afterwards or on the next morning. That afternoon, however, he was giving another abreaction, and this time ether was used instead of barbiturate. When taking over the same ground again, he told the story, this time with far greater emotion, and at last became confused and exhausted, tried to tear off the ether mask, and overbreathed in a panic-stricken way until the treatment was stopped. When he came to and rose from the couch, an obvious change had occurred in him. He smiled for the first time and looked relieved. A few minutes later, he said that most of his troubles had gone away with the ether. A week later, he was still saying, "I am a different fellow. I feel fine." This improvement was being maintained by fortnight afterwards. Another case illustrates a similar dispersal of brain stereotypy by the use of ether. Here, however, it will be seen that the use of ether in itself was not sufficient to induce complete abreaction. After a preliminary failure, the flame of the patient's excitement was deliberately fanned until he was brought to the necessary point of collapse. The stereotypity of his behavior pattern then broke up and he greatly improved. This soldier had spent 4.5 years in the army as a driver mechanic, and had landed in Normandy a fortnight after D-Day. What's fortnight? I've seen that as like the video game, like Fortnite. Meaning a period of 2 weeks. Use after the name of a day to indicate that something will take place 2 weeks after that day. Oh shit. Saturday fortnight. That is so cool. Instead of saying, in 2 weeks, you can just say in the fortnight. Fortnight. That's fucking sick. I had no idea that was a thing. What's that word? Not frugal. Not practical. Not convenient. It's a synonym for convenient. It's like a vocal economy. Where you don't where you just say less but you say a lot more with one word. Fortnight. Saturday fortnight. That is so sick. I had no idea that was such a word. I'm like so amazed. Is that common knowledge? Like, does everyone know what fortnight means? Let me know in the comments if so. Because I had never seen that word anywhere. After D-Day, his symptoms came on gradually after he had been in action for several weeks. He, too, was given a week's sedation treatment in France. He did not respond and found himself evacuated to a hospital in England. He was now depressed and apathetic, complaining of dizziness and inability to stand the noise of gunfire on aircraft. He could not rid his mind of the thought of his friends who had been killed in France. What kept reoccurring in his imagination was a scene in which one of his comrades had died with a hole through his head. Oh shit. The chin of another had been blown off. And blood was spurting from the hand of a third. That's a lot. Like, a lot. Oh, man. You have no idea how helpful this channel has been. There's a lot of videos that I make that I don't share. Not a lot. Most of them I share. And I feel like I'm giving myself advice sometimes. Like, I'm sorry. I should stay on task in this video. Anyways, well, I'm gonna use this to just ask you to please share and share, subscribe, and use this knowledge. If there is something that you would like to input, please feel free to put it in the comments. If you have an idea for a new video, I would greatly appreciate it. And we could possibly, there could be some points that I don't see and that you see, that would be amazing, for you to ask or to ask me to put more emphasis into. All right, so I'm gonna smoke one more and then we're gonna continue. Though given further sedation and insulin treatment to restore his weight, he complained a fortnight later that he felt worse than ever. The scene in which his friends had been killed or injured persisted in his imagination. He was then given ether to make him relieve this scene. And he got emotionally excited enough to say he thought that the next head to go would be his own, but he did not reach the phase of collapse. On regaining consciousness, he wept and said he felt no better. He could still see it all in his mind, so he was given a second ether treatment. This time he was made to relieve another frightening experience which had taken place some days before the one now fixed in his mind. He had been subjected to mortar fire and dive bombing in a churchyard, and when the therapist suggested to him under the ether that he was back there again, he began clawing at the couch, imagining that he was in a ditch. The therapist deliberately played on his fears by giving him realistic comments on the ever-worsening situation, until, reaching a climax of excitement, he suddenly collapsed and lay almost as if dead. Transmarginal inhibition had supervened. This time, on regaining consciousness, he smiled and said, open quote, "Everything has gone. Everything is different. I feel more open, doctor. I feel better than I did when I came here," end quote. When I asked if he remembered his friend's face being blown off, he grinned and said, "I seem to have forgotten about it. France is not worrying me now." When again questioned about this incident, he said, "Yes, and the fellow with a hole in his head, but it has lifted from my mind." When asked why this had happened, he answered, "I can't explain it." He then discussed the whole scene quite freely and without the usual display of emotion. Later in the day, he said, "I feel a lot better." Well, he said, open quote, "I feel a lot better. It has gone out of my system. I know all about it and it doesn't stick in me. It doesn't affect me in the same way," end quote. He then began to improve rapidly. The most remarkable feature in this case was that the experience chosen as a means of stirring up enough excitement to destroy his abnormal behavior patterns was not the particular one which had been haunting him. In other words, the emotional explosion cleared away a whole chapter of recent emotional history and its associated behavior patterns which had been building up due to the patient's growing inability to stand up under continued battle stress. The longer that abnormal patterns of behavior persist, the more difficult, naturally, they are to remove again by such simple methods as those just described. But a third case shows that 6 months stereotypity of thought accompanied I keep forgetting how to pronounce that word. Accompanied by depression and hysteria can sometimes be relieved in the same way. A woman in her 50s stated, on admission to hospital in 1946, open quote, I keep on going funny and seeing different incidents with rocket bombs that I have been through, end quote. She had been a full-time air raid warden in a heavily bombed London area throughout the war. The main neurotic symptoms had not set until 1945, when her job was drawing to a close. Her helmet had then been blown off by a severe rocket explosion, and something had hit the back of her head. A lump came up, but she disregarded it and continued to help in the work of rescue. I saw open quote, I saw terrible sights. Plenty of people cut to pieces under the debris. 50 people, in fact, had been either killed or injured. A few months later, the incident began to haunt her. As soon as she closed her eyes to take a rest, she saw people cut and bleeding. The same sort of pictures plagued her dreams. This had been on for 6 months before she entered the hospital. She was depressed and worried, unable to concentrate. She had also lost considerable weight and complained of giddiness, feelings of unreality, disturbed sleep, and weakness in the legs which had practically immobilized her. A neighbor said that from being a very energetic and bright person, she had become listless, forgetful, and flat. Under ether, she relived the rocket bomb incidents with great emotion and intensity, describing how she was buried under the debris with her husband until rescued by a brother. She interrupted her recital by frantically shouting for her husband, "Where are you? Where are you?" She repeated this several times at the top of her voice, at the same time groping with her fingers as though searching for him along the debris. The climax came when she described his rescue, at which point she suddenly fell back, collapsed, and inert. On regaining consciousness, she found she had the complete use of her limbs and a clear mind with no fears or visions. The improvement was maintained, and insulin treatment restored her weight. Nevertheless, we did not always find it essential in abreaction to make a patient recall the precise incident which precipitated the breakdown. It would often be enough to create in him a state of excitement analogous to that which had caused his neurotic condition, and keep it up until he collapsed. Well, he would then start to improve. Thus, imagination would have to be used in inventing artificial situations or distorting actual events, especially where the patient, while remembering the real experience which had caused him the neurosis or relieving it under drugs, had not reached the transmarginal phase of collapse necessary for disrupting the new morbid behavior pattern. Among the patients from whose cases the above important finding could be deduced was a soldier in a tank regiment, whom we could bring to the point of emotional collapse under ether only by persuading him that he was trapped in a burning tank and must try to get out at all costs. This had never actually happened, though it must have been persistent fear of his throughout the campaign. Some neurotic patients are clearly helped towards recovery when forgotten memories are brought up back to consciousness. Both Freud and Pavlov, in their researches of the working of respectively the human and the canine brain, suggests that repressed emotional incidents may create severe generalized anxiety in some temperamental types. And Janet had also emphasized the importance of re-exciting patients while trying to bring back such memories to consciousness. Yet, our experience in World War II suggested that the arousing of crude excitement might often be of far greater curative curative virtue than the relieving of any particular forgotten or remembered experience. Indeed, the amount of excitement stirred up seemed to be the determining factor in the success or failure of many attempts to disrupt newly acquired morbid behavior patterns. Okay, so Pavlov's dogs first were conditioned to behave in a particular way. Then the flood happened where they panicked the fuck out of them, and then all their behaviors were erased. All the new behaviors that were implanted to them by scientists. So this is what's happening with the subjects, the patients. They are pretty much, there's new behaviors that were put on them, such as the stereotypity that they were demonstrating or expressing, and then so they had to use abreaction in order for them to have the high amount of emotion that would take them to transmarginal inhibition, which manifests itself as a collapse. And then when they come back, just like the dogs, the new most I'm not sure if that's a word, but you know what I mean. The new most habits or behavior patterns that were induced by the traumatic experience were simply dismantled by the transmarginal inhibition induced by abreaction by the psychologist through ether. And then ether was more effective than biturates and hypnosis. So that's all we read so far. So barbiturates, hypnosis, relax. Okay, so contextualization of gang stalking. Gang stalkers have actively used GHB to make me talk. They just, here, smoke some more. Here, have some GHB. The GHB does make me talk. However, last time it made me talk, but I already knew the game, so I was just talking freely. And then I remember that the gang stalker was just like, he was literally just like saying, oh yeah, keep talking. And then like, I said, whatever, it's not important. I'm not going to see him anymore. I know I was going to block him because I knew he was a gang stalker. So then before I left, I said, I just made everything up. And I remember that his voice was like, what? And like with concern in his voice. And I was just like, yeah, I just made anything up. I'm an actor. I'm a writer. And I was just working on a book, that's gonna blah, blah. I just made a bunch of shit up. I don't remember what I said, but I do remember the most important part, that I actually told him the truth about everything that I had imagined. And I was like, I just made everything up. I'm a writer. I write experiences, and this is actually the book that I'm writing. What do you think? And he didn't say anything, and then I left. So all the information that he had given me, he now believes that it was just a bunch of bullshit that I made up, even though it's true. But he's not even gonna know. He's gonna be worried because everything I was one about the stories where I was. Remember, there's a couple of videos where I was hearing voices when I ended up in the hospital. All this shit happened with the shadow. Like, I told him all of that. But then and these stories, when the woman, the drug woman and fucking TJ had like technology that was talking to me. And then I told him all of that, and then I was just like, I was saying the truth. GHB makes you talk. So, well, if you're hanging out with gang stalkers, just be careful with what you take, because if you take any type of relaxer, you're gonna start talking. And if you just happen to tell him everything, just finish it up with, I just made all of that up. I'm a writer, or just make something up. Just be like, oh yeah, I was just making all that shit up. When I take GHB, I just speak a lot of nonsense. Boom. And that's it. Actually, that's a new one. That's exactly what if I ever am in that situation again, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, GHB makes me talk a lot of things that make no sense. Just FYI. And that's it. Anyways, let's keep going to the book. Janet. Emotion that did not carry the patient to the point of transmarginal inhibition and collapse might be of little use, which is a finding of close relevance to the main theme of this book. Namely, the physiology of religious and political conversion. Of equal relevance to the same theme were the increases of suggestibility and the hidden reversals of behavior witnessed in neurotic patients when the ultra-paradoxical phase of inhibition had presumably been reached. Negative conditioned responses becoming positive and positive negative. One more point must be made in this context. Many patients who have been subjected to repeated abreations during a period of months and even years on the psychotherapist's couch are known to become increasingly sensitive to the therapist's suggestions. He may then be able to change their previous behavior patterns without too much difficulty. They respond more willingly when he attempts to implant new ideas in them, or new interpretations of old ideas, which they would have rejected without hesitation before they develop a transference to him. To be plain, it is hoped to show that there are remarkable basic similarities between, first, the behavior of many neurotic patients during and after abreacation. Next, the behavior of ordinary people subjected to fear-provoking sermons by a powerful preacher. And lastly, the behavior of political suspects in police stations and prisons where confessions are elicited and habits of right thinking implanted. Moreover, normal groups can be stimulated in peacetime by preaching or mob oratory as surely as neurotic individuals can be by drugs during abreacative treatment in a wartime hospital. Subsequent chapters will review a variety of methods used in different contexts to achieve similar effects. Yet, let one finding be emphasized without further delay. Some types of people are peculiarly resistant to abreacation under hypnotism or drugs, and to the more peaceful religious and political methods of conversion. The over-conscientious and meticulous person, for instance, who feels obliged to dot every I, cross every T, and mind all his P's and Q's, rarely becomes too excited, even under ether, and some melancholic patients are also too deeply depressed to let their pent-up emotions be discharged by drug stimulation. Abreacation under drugs is perhaps too solemn sounding a phrase for a similar phenomenon. When a man has something to get off his chest, which has been worrying him, he is likely to take several stiff drinks and expect them to loosen his tongue for him. Conversely, drink is used in business, in journalism, and in intelligence services to force indiscreet admissions from people who find it difficult to keep a secret. And after successes on the battlefield or football field, many tongue-tied victors use drink to discharge their repressed emotions in a socially acceptable manner. In vino veritas. It's Latin, in vino veritas. What does that mean? In drink, under the influence of alcohol, a person tells the truth.
In vino veritas.
Oh, in vino veritas. Oh my God, that's funny. So in vino veritas. I'm gonna highlight that because I think that's cool. I would have, in Mexican, one would say in vino veritas. Next, emotions can also be discharged by vigorous dancing. It was with wild hysterical dances that Britain greeted the armistice in 1918. Negro jazz came as a godsend to the war neurotics of the period. The waltz and the two-step were not invented for the release of strong emotions, and the curative treatment lasted well into the 20s. Some primitive tribes used dancing for the same purpose. Abreaction by drink, first beer, later wine, and while rhythmic dancing was also the object of the ancient rites of honor of Dionysus. But the Greeks had their own word for it: catharsis, or cleansing. Abreaction is a time-worn physiological trick which has been used for better or worse by generations of preachers and demagogues to soften up their listeners' minds and help them take on desired patterns of belief and behavior. Whether the appeal has most often been to noble and heroic deeds or to cruelty and folly is a matter of the historian rather than the physiologist to decide. So that was a short chapter, don't you think? So there was no summary of the findings, but to summarize, I think I just summarized earlier before. So listen, watch that now. We're going from the psychological, and it finishes off. It finishes us off the chapter with, now we're getting into the rites, we're getting into the dancing, we're getting into abreaction by wine, things, and we're starting to get into religious abreations or methods of abreaction. But we're just done with the drug part of it. If you're getting gang stalked, be careful who you're around with. As boring as this gonna seem, stay sober. If you're gonna be drinking, do it either by yourself or with someone who you trust. But be really careful who you're doing drugs with. So when I would take GHB. GHB is pretty much gets you drunk without the calories. And that was a common thing that gang stalkers pretty much did to me, where they offered me GHB. So it worked to make me talk. When I'm comfortable, I just talk it all out. Last time I already mentioned it. I really didn't care for talking because I know I wasn't gonna be involved with him anymore. So I just spit it all out, and I finished off with, I just made all that out. Ha 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 ha, bye. And gang stalkers had nothing on me. They still don't. One of the things that I remember is that when you talk with the wrong people, my mind, well, when I talk to them about about a lot of things, I feel I remember I was thinking about what I would tell them. I would be thinking about it for extended periods of time, like things like, why did I say this, or I would just, and then I was wondering, what are they gonna do with the information that I gave them about me? Like, I would always be questioning that. So when later on, like now, that I don't care, I just, the only reason I think about it is to laugh at it, because it was so funny that I won that round with a gang stalker. I got what I wanted, and he didn't, and he got absolutely nothing, nothing out of me, and that made me happy. Uh, the encounters with gang stalkers that I've had, the past several encounters, I have been winning them. I've been on a winning streak. And because I have devised enough strategies to beat them. Because they got no new tricks. I already know other tricks that they're gonna pull off. So yeah, I think that's all I have to talk about for today. Thank you for watching. Next time our next chapter is actually gonna be chapter 4, psychoanalysis, shock treatments, and lobotomy. And yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.